Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Anna. Today I have a new story for you, called The Reading Program. It's about a busy young man who decides to volunteer his time and discovers something meaningful about patience, connection, and the power of learning at any age. As always, just relax and listen, and let's begin. James Peterson was 28 years old, working long hours as a marketing coordinator at a growing tech company. His days felt endlessly busy, filled with meetings, emails, and constant digital notifications demanding his attention. Despite his successful, fast-paced career, James increasingly felt something was missing from his life, some genuine, meaningful connection beyond his usual routine of work, gym, and scrolling through his phone during quiet evenings. Most of James's friendships had gradually become somewhat superficial over recent years, mostly consisting of quick messages and occasional weekend drinks rather than genuine, deep conversation. He often found himself scrolling through social media late at night, comparing his own life to carefully curated glimpses of other people's seemingly more fulfilling lives, a habit he recognized as unhealthy but struggled to break. One afternoon, browsing social media during a lunch break, James noticed a post from a local community organization seeking volunteers for their adult literacy program, helping adults who had never properly learned to read improve their reading skills through weekly one-on-one tutoring sessions. Something about this particular opportunity caught James's attention immediately, though he couldn't quite explain why at the time. That evening, researching the program further, James learned that adult illiteracy remained a considerably more common issue than most people realized, affecting people from all backgrounds for various complicated reasons: interrupted schooling, learning difficulties that went unaddressed during childhood, or simply falling through gaps within overwhelmed educational systems years earlier. James decided to attend an information session the following week, feeling somewhat nervous about the unfamiliar commitment, uncertain whether he possessed the necessary patience or teaching ability for such meaningful, personal work. The information session was led by a warm, experienced woman named Patricia, who had coordinated the literacy program for over a decade. She explained the volunteer tutoring process clearly. After basic training, volunteers would be matched with an individual adult learner, meeting weekly at the community center for structured, one-on-one reading sessions over several months. Patricia also shared several brief stories from previous years, describing learners who had gone on to pass their driving tests for the first time, read bedtime stories to grandchildren, or even pursue further education after building foundational reading confidence through the program. These stories moved James considerably, helping him understand the genuine, tangible impact this kind of volunteering could have on someone's entire life trajectory. Many of our tutors initially worry they're not qualified enough, Patricia told the small group of prospective volunteers. But you don't need teaching credentials here. You simply need patience, consistency, and genuine care for another person's progress. Encouraged by Patricia's reassurance, James completed the required training session, which covered basic phonics teaching methods, strategies for building learner confidence, and guidance on maintaining appropriate boundaries while still fostering genuine warmth and connection. He officially signed up as a volunteer tutor afterward, though he still felt considerable uncertainty about his ability to genuinely help someone. 2 weeks later, James was matched with his learner, a 52-year-old man named Marcus Alvarez, who worked as a delivery driver and had never properly learned to read during his difficult childhood, moving frequently between different relatives' homes and missing considerable amounts of school as a result. Patricia had briefed James beforehand about Marcus's general background, though she emphasized that James should let Marcus share his own story at whatever pace felt comfortable to him, rather than asking too many direct questions during their earliest sessions together. Walking into the community center's small meeting room for their first session, James felt his own nervousness returning, uncertain exactly how to begin a conversation with someone he knew so little about beyond a brief written summary. Their first meeting felt noticeably awkward for both men. Marcus seemed visibly embarrassed discussing his reading difficulties, avoiding direct eye contact throughout much of their initial conversation, clearly uncomfortable admitting something he had likely hidden carefully from most people throughout his entire adult life. "I've managed fine without reading much," Marcus said defensively during their first session, though his tone suggested considerable underlying frustration. "But my granddaughter's starting school soon, and I want to actually read her bedtime stories myself, not just pretend while she thinks I'm reading." This honest admission moved James considerably, immediately understanding the deeply personal motivation behind Marcus's decision to finally address something he had avoided for decades. James felt his earlier nervousness shift into genuine determination to help Marcus achieve this meaningful, heartfelt goal. Following Patricia's training guidance, James began with a careful assessment of Marcus's current reading level, discovering Marcus could recognize many individual letters and even some common words, but struggled significantly connecting sounds together fluently, particularly with unfamiliar or complicated words. Their weekly sessions started slowly, focusing on fundamental phonics, the basic relationship between letters and their sounds, something most people learn during early childhood but Marcus had never properly mastered. James found himself researching teaching techniques extensively between sessions, watching instructional videos designed for teaching adult learners specifically, since Marcus's needs differed considerably from how a child might be taught the exact same foundational skills. He learned that adult learners often benefited from connecting new reading skills directly to practical, real-world applications relevant to their daily lives, rather than generic children's examples that might feel patronizing or disconnected from Marcus's actual adult experience. Applying this insight, James began incorporating real materials from Marcus's own life into their lessons whenever possible: delivery route addresses, simple text messages from his daughter, even the ingredients list from Marcus's favorite takeout restaurant menu. This practical approach seemed to genuinely engage Marcus more effectively than the generic workbook exercises Patricia had initially provided. During their fourth session, Marcus experienced a moment of visible frustration, struggling repeatedly with a particular word despite several patient attempts. The word was necessary, a word that appeared in an address on one of his delivery routes, something he genuinely needed to recognize confidently for his actual job. He tried sounding it out 3 separate times, each attempt breaking down at a different point, his frustration visibly building with each unsuccessful attempt. "I feel stupid," Marcus admitted, pushing the practice book away slightly, clear embarrassment evident in his voice. James responded carefully, remembering specific guidance Patricia had emphasized during training about separating learning difficulties from personal intelligence. "You're not stupid at all," James said firmly. "You've been driving delivery routes across this entire city for 15 years without ever getting lost, memorizing hundreds of addresses and routes. That takes genuine intelligence. Reading is simply a specific skill that happens to require different, sequential practice, nothing more." This reframing seemed to genuinely resonate with Marcus, visibly easing some of his defensive frustration. He sat quietly for a moment, considering James's words, before picking the practice book back up and trying the difficult word one more time, this time breaking it down more slowly into smaller, manageable sounds exactly as James demonstrated. Yes, sorry," Marcus said slowly, then repeated it slightly faster. "Necessary." "That's it," James said, genuine encouragement in his voice. "Exactly right." Over the following weeks, their sessions gradually became more comfortable, Marcus slowly opening up more about his life, his job, and his genuine excitement about his upcoming granddaughter's birth. By the 8th week, Marcus successfully read his first complete simple sentence without any assistance, a moment that visibly moved him considerably. The sentence, taken from one of the practical materials James had prepared, read simply, "The delivery is ready for pickup." Marcus read it slowly, carefully, sounding out each word with visible concentration, before looking up at James with an expression of genuine disbelief. "I did that myself," Marcus said quietly, staring at the sentence with evident disbelief. "Nobody helped me with that one." "You absolutely did," James confirmed, genuinely proud himself. "That's real progress, Marcus." Marcus sat quietly for a moment, staring at the simple sentence as though it contained something far more significant than its plain words suggested. 52 years old, he said eventually, shaking his head slightly. 52 years old, and I just read a full sentence by myself for maybe the first time in my entire life. Despite this encouraging progress, James's own patients faced genuine challenges throughout their continuing sessions. Some weeks, Marcus arrived exhausted after difficult work shifts, struggling to concentrate properly during their scheduled hour together. Other weeks, previous progress seemed to inexplicably disappear, Marcus struggling with words he had successfully read confidently just days earlier. James found himself researching this exact phenomenon after one particularly discouraging session, learning that this kind of inconsistent progress was actually extremely common among adult learners, especially those managing demanding jobs and complicated personal lives alongside their learning commitments. Understanding this helped James maintain his own patience, though it didn't make individual difficult sessions feel any less frustrating in the moment. During one particularly difficult session around the 12th week, Marcus grew visibly frustrated after repeatedly stumbling over the same challenging paragraph, a short passage about a dog finding his way home that should have been well within his growing ability level by that point. He had read similar passages successfully just the previous week, and his inability to replicate that same success clearly weighed heavily on him. "Maybe I'm just too old for this," Marcus said, closing the book abruptly. "Maybe some people just aren't meant to learn this properly." James felt his own frustration rising momentarily, quickly checking himself, remembering Patricia's repeated emphasis during training about the importance of patience during inevitable difficult sessions. He took a deliberate breath before responding calmly. "Learning anything meaningful rarely happens in a straight line," James said gently. "You've made real, measurable progress over these past 3 months. One difficult evening doesn't erase that progress, Marcus. Let's take a short break, then try again with something slightly easier, just to rebuild some confidence before we end today." This patient response helped Marcus regain his composure, and their session ended considerably more positively than it had initially seemed likely. Reflecting afterward, James realized this particular moment had taught him something valuable about his own patience and emotional regulation, skills he found himself unexpectedly applying within his demanding professional life as well. Around the 4th month, James noticed something meaningful developing beyond simply Marcus's reading progress. A genuine friendship had formed between them, extending naturally beyond their structured weekly sessions. Marcus began sharing stories about his work, his family, and eventually, more personal reflections about his own difficult childhood experiences that had originally prevented him from learning to read properly. He told James about moving between his aunt's house, his grandmother's apartment, and briefly, a foster family, all before he turned 12 years old, changing schools so frequently that no single teacher ever noticed, or perhaps cared enough to address, his steadily growing reading difficulties. By the time he reached high school, Marcus had become genuinely skilled at avoiding situations that might expose his struggle, choosing vocational classes over anything requiring extensive reading, and eventually leaving school entirely at 16 to begin working. "Nobody ever really noticed I couldn't read well," Marcus admitted during one particularly candid session. "Or maybe they noticed and just didn't care enough to help. I got really good at hiding it, memorizing things, asking coworkers to read important documents for me, always finding some excuse." James listened carefully, genuinely moved by Marcus's vulnerability, understanding more deeply the considerable courage it had taken Marcus to finally address something he had successfully hidden for decades. By the 6th month, Marcus's reading ability had improved substantially, progressing from struggling with simple sentences to confidently reading short paragraphs, children's picture books, and even simple newspaper articles with growing fluency and considerably increased confidence. Marcus's granddaughter, Sophia, was born during this period, and Marcus proudly showed James photos during their sessions, his excitement about eventually reading to her properly serving as continued powerful motivation throughout the inevitable difficult moments in their ongoing lessons. "I want to read her actual books," Marcus told James firmly. "Not just point at pictures and make up stories like I used to do with my own kids." This admission revealed something James hadn't previously realized. Marcus had used clever workarounds throughout his entire life as a parent too, making up stories based on pictures rather than actually reading the words to his own children decades earlier, a secret he had apparently kept successfully hidden even from his own family. "Did your kids ever figure it out?" James asked gently, genuinely curious. Marcus considered this for a long moment. "I don't think so," he said. "Or if they did, they never said anything. Kids don't really question it when you're making a story exciting and dramatic. I got pretty good at it, honestly, changing my voice for different characters, adding funny sounds. I think they actually liked my versions better than whatever the actual words probably said." Both men laughed at this, though James recognized the underlying weight beneath Marcus's self-deprecating humor, a lifetime of careful, exhausting compensation for something he had never received proper help addressing. Around the 9th month, Patricia mentioned an upcoming program event, an annual celebration recognizing learners who had achieved significant milestones throughout the year, where participants had the opportunity to read something meaningful aloud in front of supportive family, friends, and fellow program participants. Initially, Marcus felt considerable hesitation about this suggestion, still somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of reading publicly despite his substantial private progress. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," Marcus admitted uncertainly, worry evident on his face during their session that week. "There's absolutely no obligation," James reassured him. "But I genuinely think you're more capable than you're giving yourself credit for. Take some time to think about it." Marcus mentioned the opportunity to his daughter that same week, expecting perhaps gentle discouragement given how private he had always been about his reading struggles. Instead, she reacted with immediate, enthusiastic support. "Dad, you have to do this," she told him firmly. "Sophia should see her grandfather standing up there. This is exactly the kind of thing I want her to remember about you." After considerable thought, and encouraged partly by his own daughter's enthusiastic support upon hearing about the opportunity, Marcus decided to participate, selecting a simple, meaningful children's book he specifically wanted to eventually read to his granddaughter as his chosen piece for the celebration. The following weeks involved intensive additional practice. Marcus determined to read his selected book confidently and fluently for this meaningful public moment. James adjusted their sessions accordingly, focusing specifically on building comfortable familiarity with this particular text, practicing pacing, expression, and confident delivery alongside continued fundamental reading skill development. The celebration event finally arrived, held in the community center's largest room, decorated simply but warmly, filled with proud family members, supportive tutors, and program participants themselves, many visibly nervous about their own upcoming moments to read publicly. Small refreshments sat on tables along one wall, and a handmade banner reading, "Celebrating Our Readers," hung above a small platform serving as the evening's simple stage. When Marcus's turn arrived, James watched from the audience alongside Marcus's own family, including his daughter and, most significantly, his infant granddaughter Sophia, held carefully by her mother in the front row. James noticed Marcus's hands trembling slightly as he walked toward the small platform, gripping his chosen book perhaps a little too tightly. Marcus stood before the small audience, opened his chosen children's book carefully, and began reading aloud, his voice slightly shaky at first but growing steadily more confident with each successfully completed sentence. The room remained respectfully, warmly silent throughout his reading, everyone present understanding the considerable personal significance behind this particular moment. As Marcus finished the final page, closing the book gently, the room erupted into warm, enthusiastic applause. Marcus's daughter was visibly crying, embracing her father tightly the moment he stepped down from the small stage area. "Dad, that was beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so incredibly proud of you." Marcus found James immediately afterward, embracing him warmly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Marcus said, genuine emotion evident in his voice. "Thank you for being patient with me, even during those really frustrating sessions." "You did the actual work, Marcus," James reminded him. "I just showed up consistently. You're the one who kept trying, even when it felt impossible some weeks." In the months following this meaningful celebration, Marcus continued meeting with James regularly, though their sessions gradually shifted from fundamental instruction towards simply reading together for enjoyment, tackling increasingly challenging books as Marcus's confidence and ability continued developing steadily. James, reflecting on his own unexpected journey throughout this volunteer experience, realized how significantly this commitment had changed his broader perspective beyond simply helping Marcus. He found himself approaching his demanding professional career with renewed patience, understanding more deeply the value of consistent, dedicated effort toward meaningful goals, regardless of how slowly progress sometimes appeared. Colleagues at work occasionally noticed this shift too, one manager specifically commenting that James seemed to handle difficult, slow-moving projects with noticeably more patience than he had previously demonstrated. He also found himself continuing as a volunteer tutor well beyond his original commitment, eventually being matched with a second learner once Marcus's reading skills reached a level where he felt comfortable continuing more independently, occasionally still meeting James socially for coffee, sharing updates about his ongoing reading journey with his growing granddaughter. His second learner, a younger woman named Aisha who had immigrated recently and was working simultaneously on both her English literacy and her spoken English fluency, presented entirely different challenges, requiring James to adapt his teaching approach considerably. Yet he approached this new challenge with the same patience Marcus had helped him develop, understanding that every learner's journey looked different, but the fundamental need for patience and genuine encouragement remained constant. "She's 2 now," Marcus told James proudly during one such coffee meeting nearly a year after their formal tutoring sessions concluded. "We read together every single night. Real books, not made-up stories anymore." Reflecting occasionally on his own transformative volunteer experience, James often thought back to that initial uncertain information session, remembering his own doubts about whether he possessed sufficient patience or ability to genuinely help someone else. He felt genuinely grateful he had pursued this meaningful commitment anyway, discovering not just the profound satisfaction of helping Marcus achieve his heartfelt goal, but a renewed sense of purpose and genuine connection that had been quietly missing from his previously busy, disconnected daily routine. And that's the end of today's story, the reading program. I really love this story because it shows something meaningful. Sometimes the most significant personal growth happens not through pursuing our own individual goals, but through genuinely investing our time and patience in helping someone else achieve theirs. Before you go, think about this. Is there a skill you learned easily as a child that someone else might still be struggling with as an adult? How might patience and understanding make a genuine difference for them? Thank you so much for listening today. This has been Anna, and this is the podcast. See you in the next episode. Take care, and keep practicing your English.